On the day they buried Antonio, the sky over the town of San Lorenzo seemed to want to weep alongside Isabel. The clouds were lead-grey, heavy and low, threatening a storm that nevertheless refused to break, keeping the air thick and stifling. But none of that compared to the storm raging inside Isabel. Standing before the dark hole in the ground, she felt her legs turn to rags, and if it weren't for clutching little Mateo's hand so tightly, she would have collapsed right there to be buried beside her husband. Mateo, barely 5 years old, tugged at his mom's black skirt. His big brown eyes, identical to his father's, looked around with a mix of fear and confusion. He didn't understand why his dad was sleeping in that wooden box, or why his mom wouldn't stop trembling, even though it wasn't cold. "Mom, is Dad coming home for dinner?" whispered the boy. The question pierced Isabel's heart like a knife of ice. A burning knot rose in her throat, choking back a sob that threatened to shatter the solemnity of the moment. She crouched down with difficulty, her knees creaking under the weight of grief, and caressed her son's cheek. "No, my love. Dad has gone to heaven to watch over us from up there," she managed to say with a broken voice, feeling as though each word cost her an entire universe. Behind her, she heard an impatient clearing of the throat. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Fernando, Antonio's older brother. During the ceremony, Fernando hadn't shed a single tear. Isabel had watched him out of the corner of her eye. His face was rigid, his eyes dry and calculating, looking at the people more with annoyance than grief. Fernando had always been like that, a man of numbers and business, cold. While Antonio was the smile and heart of the estate, Fernando was the bank account and silent envy. He had always hated that their father, before dying, had left Antonio in charge of the lands, recognizing in him the kindness needed to make them prosper. Now that Antonio was gone, Isabel could feel her brother-in-law's gaze fixed on her back like the sight of a rifle. When the burial ended, neighbors and friends approached to offer condolences. Quick hugs, empty words like, "I'm so sorry," and resignation that bounced off Isabel's wall of pain without consoling her at all. When the last car drove away from the cemetery, Isabel felt a chill. She knew her life had changed forever, but she couldn't imagine the scale of the disaster about to unfold. Back at the El Roble estate, the house that Antonio and she had filled with laughter and plans for 7 years, the atmosphere was different. It no longer felt like a home. The silence weighed tons. Isabel went to the kitchen to warm some milk for Mateo, trying to maintain a routine that would give the boy security. But upon entering, she found Fernando sitting at the head of the table, in the chair Antonio always occupied. He was eagerly reviewing some papers, with a glass of expensive whiskey beside him from her late husband's private collection. Isabel stopped dead in her tracks, clutching the milk carton against her chest like a shield. "Fernando, today has been a very long day. Please, leave those papers for tomorrow. I can't think straight." Fernando looked up. There was no warmth in his eyes, only metallic coldness. "There won't be a tomorrow for this, Isabel," he said, in a calm voice that was frightening. "I've been going over the accounts. My brother's management was a disaster, to put it mildly." "What are you talking about?" she asked, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. "Antonio built this estate. It produced more last year than in the entire previous decade." Fernando let out a dry, humorless laugh, stood up, and walked slowly toward her, invading her personal space and forcing her to back up until she hit the kitchen counter. "Antonio, was a dreamer, Isabel, and dreamers spend money. Besides, now that he's gone, the property reverts to the original male bloodline. I am the executor, and I've made an executive decision. Isabel's heart began pounding so hard it hurt her ribs. What do you mean? This is our home. Mateo is his son. Mateo is a child, interrupted Fernando with contempt. And you're a young widow. You can't manage this. I need to clean up the accounts, Isabel. The main house, the crops, everything passes to my direct and exclusive administration. Starting today, I'm selling off much of the land for development. Isabel felt the air leave her lungs. Anguish turned into a stab of panic. And where are we supposed to live? Fernando smiled, a twisted smile that didn't reach his eyes. He reached into the pocket of his expensive black suit and pulled out an old, rusted iron key. He dropped it on the wooden table with a metallic clang that echoed like a sentence. I'm not a monster, Isabel. I'm a good Christian, and I care about family, even if you're just an in-law. I've decided to grant you ownership of the North Hill. It's deeded in your name, as of this morning. Isabel stared at the key. The North Hill. She vaguely remembered Antonio mentioning some old structures there on the edge of the property, where the land was rockier and the wind blew fiercely. The North Hill, she asked, confused, her voice trembling. But Fernando, there's nothing habitable there, just ancient ruins. There is a solid stone structure, he replied, turning to pour himself more whiskey. A historic cabin. Antonio always said he liked old things, didn't he? Well, there you have it. You have 1 hour to gather your personal belongings and the boys. No furniture. Those belong to the estate. Just clothes and small items. If you're still here at 6 p.m., I'll call the police for trespassing. The cruelty of his words left Isabel paralyzed for a few seconds. 1 hour after burying her husband. She wanted to scream, to lunge at him and scratch that smug face, but she glanced toward the door. Mateo was peeking in, dragging his teddy bear on the floor, watching them. She couldn't fall apart in front of him. She had to be strong. She had to be a lioness. Swallowing her pride and tears, Isabel ran to the bedroom. She grabbed 2 old suitcases. Her hands shook so much she could barely close the latches. She stuffed in Mateo's clothes without folding them. The blue coat, corduroy pants, wool socks. Then her own, the thickest she could find. She desperately searched for anything of value, but remembered her jewelry was in the office safe, whose combination Fernando had surely already changed. She could only take a framed wedding photo from the nightstand and some loose cash from her purse. "Mom, why are you crying? Are we going on a trip?" asked Mateo, sitting on the bed, swinging his little legs. Isabel wiped her tears with the back of her hand, took a deep breath to steady her voice, and smiled at her son, even though inside she was dying. "Yes, my life. We're going on an adventure, a camping trip, like the ones Dad loved." They left the big house just as the hallway clock struck 6. Fernando was on the porch, leaning against a column, watching them go. He didn't say goodbye. Isabel didn't give him the satisfaction of looking back. She grabbed the heavy suitcase with one hand and Mateo's warm little hand with the other, and began walking down the dirt path toward the north. The way was hard. The North Hill was a constant 2-kilometer climb. The sky remained grey and oppressive. The suitcase wheels bumped against rocks, slowing their progress. Isabel felt cold sweat running down her back, mixing with anguish. Her dress shoes, unsuitable for the terrain, hurt her feet, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. "My feet hurt, Mommy," complained Mateo after half an hour of walking. We're almost there, my love. See that ridge up there? That's our adventure, Isabel lied, feeling terrible guilt for deceiving her son's innocence. When they finally reached the top of the hill, Isabel dropped the suitcase and froze. Horror struck her chest like a hammer. What Fernando had called a home was nothing more than a stone skeleton. Yes, the walls were thick and ancient, solid walls that had withstood centuries, but that was all. Looking up, Isabel saw no wood, no tiles, no shelter. She saw the grey, threatening sky directly overhead. The cabin had no roof. The original beams had rotted and collapsed decades ago, now lying on the interior floor, turned to dirt and rotten wood, mixed with weeds growing in what should have been the living room. Isabel walked like a sleepwalker into the interior, crossing the frame of a door that no longer had a door. The floor was dirt and vegetation. The windows were empty holes through which the wind whistled a sad song. It was an open-air ruin. An animal pen would have been more dignified. "Mommy, there's no roof here," said Mateo. His little voice, full of disappointment, broke Isabel's heart. "If it rains, we'll get wet." Isabel fell to her knees on the damp ground. The reality of her situation crushed her. A widow with no money, and now no roof. Fernando had literally sent her out into the elements. Rage began to boil in her blood, momentarily pushing aside sadness. How could such evil exist in a human being? How could he do this to his own nephew? At that moment, the sound of horse hooves thundered nearby. Isabel stood quickly, wiping dirt from her knees, positioning herself in front of Mateo like a protective barrier. It was Fernando. He had ridden up on horseback, surely taking the shortcut through the woods just to witness her humiliation. He stopped a few meters from the ruin's entrance, mounted on his purebred horse, looking down with a mocking sneer. "Well, it seems it needs a few repairs, don't you think, sister-in-law?" shouted Fernando, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But the fresh air is good for your health, and they say the view of the stars from here is priceless." "You're a monster, Fernando," shouted Isabel, with a voice that surprised even herself, a voice that came from her gut. "Mateo is your blood. He has nowhere to sleep." Fernando pulled the reins, making the horse shift and frightening Mateo, who hid behind his mom's legs. "If you want a roof, work to buy one. That way you'll learn what real life costs. Little princess, I hope you enjoy stargazing tonight. It looks like it's going to be a damp one." With a cruel laugh that echoed through the valley, Fernando spurred the horse and galloped down the hill, leaving them alone, abandoned and exposed. Isabel looked up. A cold, heavy raindrop fell on her forehead, then another and another. The sky had finally decided to break and weep. Night was approaching fast, bringing a darkness that promised to be terrifying. They were alone in a stone house that was more trap than shelter, and the storm was about to burst upon them. Listen carefully, friends. If this cruelty has made your blood boil, don't go anywhere, because if you think Isabel is going to give up and let her son freeze, you don't know the strength of a wounded mother. But the night ahead will be the toughest test of their lives, and what they'll have to do to survive until dawn will leave you breathless. Leave a like right now if you're rooting for Isabel, and keep listening. The real storm is just beginning. The first drop that fell on Isabel's forehead wasn't just water. It felt like a warning, a cold sentence marking the start of a nightmare. Isabel looked at the sky, where black clouds swirled like furious beasts preparing to attack. The air suddenly turned icy and cutting, a wind that didn't just move tree leaves, but seemed intent on tearing skin. There was no time for regrets, no time to mourn Fernando's cruelty. If they stayed still, the night would swallow them. "Mateo, listen to me," said Isabel, crouching to her son's level and grabbing his shoulders. Her hands trembled, but she forced her voice to sound steady, even as she crumbled inside. "We need to build a fort. Remember the forts you made with Dad in the living room, with sheets?" Mateo nodded, his lips already turning purple from the sudden drop in temperature. His eyes were wide, reflecting a fear no child should know. "Yes, Mommy, but there are no sheets here. We'll use whatever we find. You look for sticks, branches that aren't too wet. I'll find something else. Run, my love. It's a game against the rain." Isabel launched into a frantic search inside the stone ruins. It was a race against the fading light. Her eyes scanned the ground full of debris, dirt, and weeds. She spotted a corner where two walls still met, offering minimal shelter from the wind that was already whistling through the empty windows, like ghost laments. She ran to a pile of trash that seemed abandoned years ago, rotten furniture remnants, rusted cans, and by divine grace, some old black plastic sheets, dirty and sun-bleached, likely left from abandoned farm work or hunters. Isabel pulled them desperately. The plastic was brittle from years of sun, but it was waterproof. "This has to work. It has to," she repeated to herself as she scraped her hands on splinters and rocks. The wind blew stronger, nearly ripping the plastic from her grasp. Isabel gritted her teeth. She wasn't a country woman. Her hands were soft, used to caring for her home, cooking, caressing her husband. Now those same hands bled from small cuts, grabbing old wood full of rusty nails. She dragged a couple of heavy, fallen beams, like tombstones, and propped them against the corner wall, creating a kind of slanted skeleton. "Mommy, I found these," shouted Mateo, bringing a handful of dry twigs that would barely help. But Isabel smiled, a painful smile that broke her heart. "Great job, champion. Put them there. It'll help plug the gaps." With strength she didn't know she had, fueled purely by panic adrenaline, Isabel stretched the plastic over the improvised beams. She used heavy rocks to secure the edges to the ground, breaking 2 nails in the process and feeling sharp pain in her fingers, but ignoring it completely. Physical pain was a welcome distraction from the terror of seeing her son exposed. They had barely crawled under that miserable shelter when the sky broke. It didn't start raining. The sky collapsed. The sound was deafening, a constant roar of water pounding stone, dirt, and the fragile plastic that was all separating them from hypothermia. Inside, the space was tiny. It smelled of wet earth and fear. Isabel hugged Mateo, pulling him to her chest, wrapping him in her own coat and arms. They sat on one of the suitcases to avoid the ground, which was quickly turning to mud. "I'm cold, Mom," whimpered Mateo, burying his face in Isabel's neck. "Shh, my life. Think of warm things. Think of the hot chocolate Grandma makes. Think of summer sun," she whispered, kissing his head, feeling her small boy's body tremble violently against hers. Darkness fell over them like a lead blanket. They could no longer see their hands, only hear nature's fury. Isabel closed her eyes and prayed. She wasn't very religious, but that night she prayed with an intensity that could have moved the stones of that house. "Antonio, if you're there, don't abandon us. Don't let your brother win. Protect your son, please." But it seemed Antonio was far away, or that Fernando's evil held more power that night. The wind shifted direction. A sharp, terrifying howl swept through the ruins, and then the worst happened. A violent gust slipped under the plastic. Isabel tried to hold it with her hands, screaming from the effort, feeling her shoulder muscles tear. "No, no, don't take it," she shouted against the wind. But nature has no mercy. With a dry crack, the old plastic tore in half and flew into the night's blackness, taking their illusion of safety with it. They were exposed. "Mom!" screamed Mateo, terrified by the roar and the sudden blast of icy water. Isabel had no time to think. She threw herself over Mateo, pushing him into the deepest corner of the stone walls. "Stay there. Don't move." But it wasn't just water. A dry sound, like stones hitting the ground, mixed with the rain. Thud, 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 crack, hail. Hailstones the size of walnuts fell with bullet speed from the sky. In that roofless house, it was like being in the middle of a firing squad. The hail bounced off the stone floor, ricocheted, and struck everything. Isabel saw one ice stone hit Mateo's shoulder. He let out a cry of pain. "It hurts!" That cry triggered something primal in Isabel. A fury, a heat rising from her belly to her eyes. She forgot the cold. She forgot her own safety. She grabbed Mateo, sat him in the corner, took off her own thick jacket, and put it over him like a giant hood. Then she did the only thing a mother can do when the world collapses. She became a shield. Isabel knelt over her son, hunching her back, covering him completely with her body. She hugged his knees, hiding her own head against his chest, leaving her back, shoulders, and neck exposed to the storm. "Don't be afraid, Mateo. Mom is here. Nothing will touch you. I'm a castle. I'm made of stone," she told him in his ear, raising her voice over the hail's noise. The first strong impact hit her right shoulder blade. Isabel gasped in pain. It felt like a real stoning. Then another on her spine, another on her head. Blow after blow after blow. Each was a lash of ice. She felt her skin turning purple under her thin blouse. The hail was merciless, hard, relentless. The melting ice burned her skin as it ran down her back. Her teeth chattered so hard she feared breaking her jaw. Icy water soaked her hair, underwear, shoes. She felt herself turning to ice, her toes going numb. But she didn't move an inch. Pause here, dear listener. Look me in the eyes. I'm talking to you, sitting comfortably watching this. Do you feel that lump in your throat? Do you feel the pain of that mother taking ice stones so her son doesn't suffer a scratch? If you would give your life for those you love, don't hesitate. Hit like on this video right now. Let the algorithm know that a mother's love is the most powerful force in the universe. And don't you dare leave, because if you think Isabel will stay crying in that corner, you don't know what this woman is made of. The night is long, but dawn brings surprises. Let's continue. Isabel lost track of time. It could have been minutes or hours. There was only the sharp pain of impacts on her back and the faint warmth of Mateo's body beneath her. The boy cried softly, whimpering, "Mommy, you're so cold. You're wet." "It doesn't matter, my love. I'm strong. I'm strong." As the ice pummeled her, Isabel's mind went to a dark but necessary place. She thought of Fernando, imagined him in his bed under feather duvets, dry and warm, perhaps sipping another glass of wine by the fireplace Antonio had built. That image didn't sadden her. It enraged her. "I swear on my life," she thought, biting her lip until she tasted blood. "I swear every hailstone I take today you'll pay for. Not with violence, Fernando, but by watching me rise. You'll see us triumph from your window and rot with envy. You won't kill me. You won't kill my son. This storm isn't my end. It's my baptism." Hatred of injustice kept her warm. Indignation worked better than any heater. Every time she felt faint from cold and pain, she remembered her brother-in-law's mocking smile and hugged Matteo tighter. Gradually, the deafening hail noise lessened, turning back to heavy rain, then persistent drizzle. The storm was passing, leaving a desolate landscape and 2 humans on the brink of collapse. When Isabel felt no more stones falling, she tried to move. Her body was rigid, frozen in that protective position. Straightening up, she let out an involuntary groan. Her back was a map of bruises and pain. She felt numb muscles and clothes stuck to her skin like a second icy layer. Matteo peeked out from under his human shelter. He was dry, scared, but dry. He touched his mom's face with his little hands. "Mom, it stopped." "Yes, my love, it's over." "We did it," she said, her lips trembling uncontrollably. They collapsed, sitting, exhausted, leaning against the damp wall. Darkness was still absolute, but the post-storm silence was somehow more terrifying. She was soaked. They were alone, surrounded by wild nature. In the distance came the howl of some animal, a coyote perhaps, or a feral dog. Matteo curled up against her again. "Mommy, I'm hungry." Isabel felt a stab in her stomach, not hunger, but helplessness. She remembered they hadn't eaten dinner. She rummaged in her pockets with numb fingers until she found a small chocolate bar she always carried for Matteo's low blood sugar moments. It was squished and melted from the walk's heat, then hardened again by cold. She broke it in 2, giving him the bigger piece. "Here, my love, explorer's dinner." "And you, Mommy?" "I'm not hungry. I'm full. Eat it all." As she watched her son eat the chocolate in the dimness, Isabel looked up at the open rectangle of sky between the stone walls. The clouds were slowly parting, revealing one pale, distant star twinkling with trembling light. "There's Dad," whispered Matteo, pointing with his chocolate-stained finger. Isabel felt hot tears finally well up, mixing with rainwater on her cheeks. She cried silently so as not to scare the boy, from rage, physical pain, humiliation. But staring at that lone star, a steel certainty forged inside her. That had been the worst night of her life. Fernando had thrown them into hell, expecting them to break. That the next day they'd come down the hill begging for mercy or leave forever. But Fernando had made a fatal miscalculation. By taking their roof, he forced them to look at the sky. By taking comfort, he gave them resilience. Isabel hugged her son, closed her eyes, and waited for dawn. She knew when the sun rose, she wouldn't be the same woman who climbed the hill, dragging a suitcase. The fragile widow had died under the hail. Tomorrow, the lioness would be born. And coincidentally, or perhaps by fate, help was already on the way, approaching with the slow steps of an old man who hadn't forgotten loyalty. The next morning would bring light, but also a discovery that would change the game forever. Isabel didn't know it yet, but beneath her feet, under that mud and misery, the old house hid a secret waiting to be found. But to reach it, they first had to survive the day. Dawn didn't arrive as a gift, but as a raw revelation. When the first rays of sun pierced the mist and struck the damp stones of the ruin, they illuminated a desolate scene. The ground was a swamp of mud, and in one corner, curled on a soaked suitcase, Isabel and Matteo slept the restless sleep of exhaustion. Isabel opened her eyes, and pain hit immediately. Her back burned. She felt every bruise the hail had left the night before, a map of pain on her skin for protecting her son. She tried to stretch her arms and let out a hoarse groan. Her joints were stiff from cold and dampness. Matteo woke at her movement. His eyes were swollen. "Mom, I'm thirsty," he whispered hoarsely. Isabel looked around desperately. They had no drinking water. Rainwater in puddles was dirty, full of soil and leaves. Helplessness struck her stomach again. How would she care for him? How had they fallen so low in less than 24 hours? "Hold on a bit, my love. We'll go down to the stream near the path," she said, trying to sound optimistic even as she felt broken inside. That's when they heard it. The sound of heavy boots crunching dry branches. Crack, 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 and an animal's snort. It wasn't a fine horse like Fernando's. It sounded more like the tired sigh of a pack animal. Panic gripped Isabel. Had Fernando returned to finish the job? Was he coming to evict them from the ruin too? She stood shakily, grabbed a thick stick from the ground, and planted herself in front of Matteo, ready to fight with what little strength she had left. Her heart pounded against her sore ribs. "Who's there?" she shouted, with a broken but fierce voice. "Don't come closer. We have nothing." A figure emerged from the brush. It wasn't Fernando. It was a short man, stooped by years, with skin tanned by 1,000 suns, and a thick white moustache hiding a kind mouth. He wore a worn plaid shirt and a straw hat that had seen better days. He led an old burro loaded with tools. Isabel slowly lowered the stick, tears of relief filling her eyes. "Don Ramon?" she asked, hardly believing it. Don Ramon stopped dead upon seeing their state. His old, tired eyes took in the scene. No roof, mud-soaked child, bruises on Isabel's arms. The old man removed his hat in respect and pain, and when he spoke, his voice trembled with indignation. "Holy Virgin, child Isabel, what have they done to you? What kind of demon throws a woman and child into this mess?" Isabel couldn't hold back any more. She dropped the stick and covered her face with her hands, sobbing. The night's tension, fear, rage, all poured out. "Fernando," she moaned through tears. "He took everything from us, Don Ramon. He gave us this ruin and said if we wanted a roof, we'd have to work for it." Matteo slept in the rain. Don Ramon released the burro's reins and walked toward her as fast as his old legs allowed. He placed a heavy, calloused hand on her shoulder, a hand like old tree bark, warm and strong. "Calm down, daughter, calm down. That man has no fear of God, and the one above sees and collects everything, but crying doesn't dry the ground." The old man turned to his burro and began untying sacks. "I saw the hail smoke last night, and my heart told me, Ramon, Boss Antonio wouldn't leave his woman alone. So I came early. I brought hot coffee, child, and some corn tortillas. The smell of fresh coffee from Don Ramon's thermos was the best aroma Isabel had ever experienced. As Matteo eagerly devoured a tortilla, Isabel felt the hot liquid restore her soul. Let's pause here, dear family. Look at the image. A battered mother, a hungry child, and a poor old man sharing what little he has. Have you ever received help from the least expected person, from the humble one who gives what they don't have, while the rich who have everything deny even water? If you believe angels sometimes come disguised as hard-working grandfathers, write angel in the comments and like this video right now. Let Don Ramon feel our applause. When they finished eating, Don Ramon stood and adjusted his belt. His gaze changed, no longer pity, but technical determination. He looked up at the open sky rectangle. "Well, Doña Isabel, Fernando told you to work if you wanted a roof. So we'll work, but you won't do it alone. My bones creak, but my hands still remember how to raise walls. Don Ramon, I have no money to pay you. Don't offend me." The old man cut her off kindly. "Antonio paid me 1,000 times over. When my wife was sick, He paid for her medicine without telling anyone. This isn't work. It's a debt of honor. And he winked at Matteo. I'm not letting my new helper get wet again, right, kid? Matteo smiled, a shy but real smile. Yes, I'm strong, Don Ramon. And so began the day of reconstruction. Don Ramon was a wizard of poverty. He brought no new materials because he didn't know, but he knew the hills like the back of his hand. He led Isabel and Matteo to an old collapsed barn half a kilometer away, hidden among trees. We stored old zinc sheets here when we replaced the stable roofs 10 years ago, he explained, pushing aside vines. Indeed, there they were, rusted at the edges, dented, ugly, but intact. It's gold, said Isabel, grabbing a sheet enthusiastically. For the next 8 hours, they worked without rest. Isabel, despite her back pain, carried wood, cleared debris, and helped Ramon lift things. She discovered rage is excellent fuel. Every nail she hammered, she imagined nailing Fernando's injustice. Bang, bang, bang. Don Ramon, at 70, moved with deceptive slowness. He didn't run, but he never stopped. He knew exactly where to strike, how to fit a rotten beam with a fresh oak branch cut from the woods, how to tie with sweet wire when nails were missing. You know, Doña Isabel, said Ramon from atop an improvised ladder, nails in his mouth. This house has history. It's no ordinary ruin. To me, it looks like a tomb, replied Isabel, handing him a hammer. Ramon stopped the hammer mid-air and looked at her intently. Don't say that. Antonio loved this place. As a boy, he escaped the big house because his father was strict. And Fernando? Well, Fernando was always bitter. Antonio came here. He said these walls gave him peace. Isabel paused to wipe sweat from her brow. He came here. He never told me. Oh yes, he'd spend hours, especially by the fireplace. That one there. Ramon pointed with the hammer at the huge soot-blackened stone mouth full of bird nests. He'd sit inside it, literally, said it was his secret cave. He liked hiding his childhood treasures, marbles, toy soldiers, letters. Antonio always said old stones are the best keepers of secrets. That phrase hung in the air. Old stones are the best keepers of secrets. Isabel looked at the fireplace differently. It no longer seemed a dirty hole, but a place that had sheltered her husband's innocence. She felt a strange connection, a warmth in her chest, not from physical effort. "Mommy, look!" shouted Matteo. Don Ramon had placed the last zinc sheet. It wasn't perfect. Holes patched with tar he brought, mismatched colors, unpolished wood beams. But when Isabel looked up from inside, she no longer saw grey sky. She saw a roof. Her roof. The sense of achievement was intoxicating. She felt dirty, every muscle aching, hands full of cuts and blisters, but more powerful than when she lived in the mansion dressed in silk. "We won't get wet anymore, Matteo," she said, hugging her son, who was covered head to toe in dust but smiling wide. Afternoon was falling, painting the sky orange. Don Ramon climbed down the ladder, wiping his hands on his pants. "Well, it's no Buckingham Palace, but it'll hold against wind and water. Tomorrow I'll bring putty for the windows and maybe some spare glass from a job in town." Isabel approached the old man and took his hands. She had no words. How do you thank someone who restores your dignity? Don Ramon, you've saved our lives. Antonio must be smiling from heaven. Antonio would be proud of you, child. You're a lioness. But listen, Ramon's face grew serious. Fernando will come. When he sees you haven't left, he'll snoop. That man is like a vulture. He can't stand seeing prey breathe. Let him come. said Isabel, hardening her jaw. "I'll be waiting. This house is no longer a ruin. It's my home." Ramon nodded, mounted his burro, and whistled softly. "I'll come tomorrow. You need to clean that fireplace. If you want fire tonight, it'll be cold again. And with the roof, the heat will stay inside. But clean it well. It's full of years of filth." "We will." "Good night, Grandpa Ramon," shouted Mateo. The old man smiled, a tear rolling down his weathered cheek, and rode away down the path. Isabel turned to the cabin's interior, now dark and protected. Only twilight light entered through the door and empty windows. She looked at the giant fireplace, monstrous, imposing, made of irregular river stones. "Well, Mateo, Grandpa Ramon is right. We need fire. Let's clean that cave." What Isabel didn't know was that this routine cleaning, this simple act to warm her son, was about to change her destiny in a way even Don Ramon, with all his wisdom, couldn't predict. Because Antonio hadn't just hidden marbles in that fireplace. Antonio had left something there, prepared for the worst day. And that day had arrived. Friends, don't move. You're about to enter the mystery with Isabel. What secrets did Antonio keep from his greedy brother? What hides behind the soot and cold stone? The next part will give you chills. If you want Isabel to find her reward, subscribe now and hit the bell. The discovery is one hammer strike away. Twilight brought a new reality for Isabel and Mateo. No more rain fell on their heads thanks to the patched zinc sheets from Don Ramon's saintly hands. However, with the roof in place, darkness inside the stone cabin grew denser, deeper. Air no longer circulated violently, and the smell of ancient dampness, fermented earth, and abandonment became much stronger. Isabel stood in the center of what was once a living room. Her hands, yesterday the cared-for hands of a society lady, were now black with dirt, full of scratches, trembling from lifting beams. She looked at Mateo. The boy sat on the suitcase, legs dangling, playing with a stick. He no longer cried. There was a strange resignation in his eyes that broke Isabel's heart more than any tears. A 5-year-old shouldn't have a survivor's gaze. "Mommy, is this a house now?" he asked, breaking the heavy silence. Isabel took a deep breath, swallowing floating dust. "Yes, my love. It's a shelter, but it's still dirty. Pretty houses need love to shine." She knew they couldn't sleep like this another night. The floor was still a mix of dried mud and decades-accumulated rotten leaves. Worst was the cold. Night on the hill, even with a roof, promised bone-chilling temperatures. She looked at the imposing stone fireplace dominating the back wall, a giant black mouth like the entrance to a forgotten mine. If they could light a fire there, the stone would warm and radiate heat all night. It would mean the difference between shivering until dawn or sleeping to regain strength. "Mateo, let's play miners," said Isabel, injecting enthusiasm into her tired voice. "You'll collect small stones from the floor and pile them in that corner. I'll handle the fireplace monster." The boy nodded and got off the suitcase. Isabel approached the fireplace. Up close, she saw the extent of neglect. It wasn't just dust. Layers of old bird nests, branches fallen through the chimney, petrified soot like asphalt, and cobwebs thick as lace curtains. Isabel had no proper tools. Don Ramon had taken his. She searched the floor until finding a flat piece of iron, likely an old rusty hinge from a long-gone door. It would be her shovel, scraper, weapon. She knelt before the hearth. The soot smell was strong, acrid, reminding her of cold ashes, things that burned long ago and died out. Like my life, she thought bitterly. Everything that shone turned to ash. But she shook her head quickly. She couldn't afford those thoughts. Fernando wanted her defeated, and every shovelful of trash she removed was a slap in his face. She began scraping. Scrape, scrape. The metal-on-stone sound echoed in the empty room. She pulled out handfuls of black, sticky matter. Her arms, already sore from roof work, screamed in protest. Shoulders burned. Soot dust rose in black clouds, sticking to her sweat, covering her face, entering her nose and mouth. She coughed violently, spitting black saliva. "Are you okay, Mommy?" asked Mateo, scared by the cough. "Yes, my life. It's just black fairy dust," she lied, wiping her eyes with her forearm, leaving a dark streak on her forehead. "Keep gathering little stones. You're doing great." Isabel kept digging. It was disgusting work. She found small rodent bones, making her shudder with disgust, but threw them out without Mateo seeing. She had to reach the bottom, to clean the flue so smoke would rise and not suffocate them. As she worked mechanically, her mind returned to Don Ramon's words. Antonio loved this place, said these walls held family history, spent hours moving things in that fireplace. Isabel paused, breathing hard. She looked at the surrounding stones. Why had Antonio, a man who could have any comfort, come to this cold hole? What did he find here that he didn't in the luxurious mansion? Perhaps Antonio felt suffocated by his family's cold perfection. Perhaps here in the ruin, he could be himself. Isabel felt a wave of tenderness. She imagined her husband as a boy, hiding here, away from his father's stern gaze and Fernando's envy. "If you loved this place, Antonio, help me love it too," she whispered into the dark chimney flue. "Help me find warmth here. I'm freezing my soul." She returned to work with renewed fury. She had removed most loose debris. Now she scraped inner walls to remove stuck soot, flammable and dangerous. She crawled almost fully inside the fireplace mouth. It was pitch black. Only a fading twilight ray let her see where to place her hands. She scraped the back wall, a massive flat slab, black from centuries of fire. Clack, clack, clack. The sound was monotonous, hypnotic. Fatigue was winning. Her eyes closed on their own. She was hungry, thirsty, in pain. She was about to give up. Enough tomorrow. When something happened. A subtle detail only someone attuned to desperation's sound would notice. Isabel struck the back wall with her rusty iron to loosen hardened soot. Thud. She frowned. She had been hitting solid stone for an hour, always a vibrant clack of absolute density. But that last strike sounded different, deep, hollow. Thump. "What is this?" she thought, her heart racing without knowing why. Stop a moment, dear listener. Have you ever felt that gut instinct telling you something isn't normal? Isabel, amid dirt and exhaustion, just heard something that shouldn't be there. They say when we hit rock bottom, that's when we find the greatest treasures. Isabel is literally at the bottom of a dirty fireplace. If you want her to find light in that darkness, write hope in the comments now. Let her know you're scraping that wall with her, and give a big like for strength. Let's continue. The mystery is about to reveal itself. Isabel set aside fatigue. Curiosity and strange anxiety took over. She grabbed an old rag used for wiping sweat and frantically rubbed that back stone. She wanted to see the surface, remove years of black to reveal bare rock. She rubbed until her fingers hurt. Soot gave way, revealing grey granite, different from the side river stones. But it wasn't the color that made Isabel gasp. Running her nail over the cleaned surface, she felt a groove. Not a natural crack. Too straight, too deliberate. She pressed her face close in the dimness. The groove formed lines, numbers. Someone had chiseled them long ago, with force. Isabel traced them with her trembling finger. 1, 4, dash, 0, 5. Air escaped Isabel's lungs like a punch. She froze on her knees in the ashes, staring at those numbers. May 14th wasn't just any date, not Antonio's birthday, not historical. It was their wedding day, the day Antonio and she vowed to love until death parted them. Tears welled again, not sadness, but shock. Those numbers weren't carved by a playing child. The strokes were firm, deep, made by an adult man's hand. And the stone, it sounded hollow. "Mommy, why are you frozen?" asked Matteo from behind. Isabel turned slowly. She looked crazed, covered in black, white eyes shining in darkness, clean tear rivers on dirty cheeks. "Matteo, bring the tool. Bring the iron," she said hoarsely. "Why?" "To open the door, son." Isabel turned back to the stone. Her mind raced. Antonio had carved that date. He knew only she would recognize it. He knew if anyone ever cleaned this fireplace, it would be her. Or perhaps Antonio knew one day she'd need to look here. Don Ramon said Antonio hid treasures here. "Is this your last game, my love? Your last hiding place?" She gripped the rusty hinge with both hands, inserted it into the tiny gap separating the carved stone from others. It fit. There was a minimal space, nearly invisible, filled with fake mortar of mud and wax that crumbled easily. Isabel levered, groaning with effort. The stone was heavy. "Help me, Antonio," she shouted, pushing with her whole body. Stone scraped stone, chilling her skin. Rrr, click. The stone moved. It didn't fall forward. It pivoted. A rustic, ingenious mechanism based on counterweights, like ancient masons made to hide valuables in wartime. The back stone swung on an invisible axis, revealing a dark, dry, clean hollow behind. A secret compartment. Isabel's heart pounded like a war drum in her ears. Fear of the unknown battled hope. What could be there? Stale air? Bugs? She reached in fearfully, feeling the darkness. Her fingers touched no webs, cold metal, a smooth, solid surface, a box. Isabel held her breath. Her fingers closed around a metal handle on top. She pulled. It was heavy, very heavy. She exclaimed as she dragged it out and dropped it on the hearth ashes with a dull thud. Thud. Matteo ran over. "What is it, Mommy?" "A treasure chest." Isabel looked. Not a wooden pirate chest, a grey military-style metal safe, hermetically sealed against moisture and time. It had a combination lock, no key, just a numbered dial. Isabel looked at the box, then the carved stone. 1405, she whispered. "The date. It all comes down to us, Antonio." With trembling fingers that barely obeyed, Isabel turned the dial. First to 14, click, then 05, click. Finally, she tried their wedding year. The lock made a clear, wonderful mechanical sound. It opened. Isabel stared at the closed box with the open lock dangling. She knew lifting that lid would change her life. It could be empty, hold only love letters, or the answer to why Fernando inherited everything and she nothing. She looked at her dirty, thin, expectant son, looked at the ruin around them. She had nothing to lose. Absolutely nothing. She placed hands on the cold metal lid. "Please," she whispered, "please." She lifted it, and what she saw made her cover her mouth to stifle a scream. The reflection inside lit her dirty face with golden glow, even in twilight dimness. It wasn't just memories. It was the future. But alongside the shine was an old leather notebook. And Isabel knew instinctively the notebook was worth more than all the gold in the world. Fernando was drinking whiskey in his mansion, thinking he'd won. He had no idea the foolish widow he'd sent to live among rats had just found the key to his destruction. Family. My heart is pounding. Isabel found it. The secret legacy. But what exactly is in that box? How much is it worth? And most importantly, what dark secrets did Antonio write in that notebook to protect his wife from beyond? Fernando is dangerous. If he finds out, he'll stop at nothing. The world around Isabel vanished. No more cold, hunger, or the smell of mud and soot filling the cabin. All that existed was that open metal rectangle on her knees and the glow emanating from inside, defying the falling twilight on the hill. Mateo, with childlike innocence, broke the sacred silence first. He reached out a dirty finger and touched one of the round, shining pieces piled on top. "Mommy, are these pirate coins?" he asked, eyes wide. Isabel released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding, trembling, ragged. "No, my love," she whispered, voice choked with overwhelming emotion. "They're not pirate. They're Dad's." With violently shaking hands, Isabel dipped fingers into the box. The feel of cold, heavy metal against her wounded, calloused skin was electric. She pulled out a handful of coins, heavy, very heavy. She held them to the chimney's light ray. Gold gleamed with deep, ancient, unmistakable color. Centenario gold coins, thick and solid 50-peso pieces. She knew their value. Antonio's grandfather collected them, said to be the family's emergency reserve for failed crops or war. Isabel counted mentally as she let them fall back with melodic clinks. Clink, clink, clink. There were dozens, perhaps hundreds. That sound wasn't just money. It was freedom. A new house, food on Mateo's table for years, the sound saying she'd never humble herself before Fernando again. But coins covered only the top layer. Isabel removed a blue velvet cloth from the bottom. Beneath gleamed red and green stones, Doña Sofia's jewels, Antonio's grandmother's. Oh God! Isabel covered her soot-blackened mouth, smearing her face further. But it didn't matter. Fernando had searched frantically for those jewels after their parents' death, yelled at employees, turned the house upside down, accused everyone of theft. He wanted to sell them for gambling debts. Isabel always thought they'd been stolen for real. But no. Antonio had saved them. Fernando never understood the value of history, Antonio used to say. He hid the family jewels in the useless house's fireplace, the one place Fernando's sophisticated greed would never look. The hiding spot was brilliant in its simplicity. Fernando's arrogance was the safest lock. Dramatic pause, friend. Think about it. A good man, seeing his brother's evil, hides his family's future in ashes. Would you trust your treasure to a ruin to protect those you love? If you think Antonio was a genius, write wise in the comments now. And get tissues, because the gold is the least valuable part of what Isabel is about to find. Isabel was awestruck, but her heart sought more. Money fills the belly, but doesn't heal nostalgia. That's when she saw at the bottom, under all the shine, a humble object. A worn black leather notebook with frayed edges, tied with a red satin ribbon, the ribbon from Isabel's wedding bouquet. And on top, a white envelope sealed with wax, in her husband's strong, unmistakable handwriting. For Isabel, open only if Fernando betrays you. The words hit Isabel like a physical blow. The world spun. Open only if Fernando betrays you. Antonio knew. He always knew. Tears she'd held back while admiring gold exploded, thick and hot on the metal lid, cleaning dust and soot. Mateo, scared seeing his mum cry like that, hugged her arm. "Mommy, Don't cry. We can give the treasure back if you want." Isabel dropped the box and hugged her son so hard she lifted him off the ground, covering his face with wild kisses. "These aren't sad tears, my love. Dad was a magician. He knew we'd need this. He protected us. Matteo, he's still watching over us." Isabel sat on the floor again, wiped her hands on her torn blouse, and took the envelope. Her hands shook so much she struggled to break the seal. The tearing paper sounded like thunder in the cabin's quiet. She unfolded the letter. The paper still faintly smelled of Antonio's woody cologne. Isabel closed her eyes and breathed it in, feeling awful pain from missing him, but immense comfort, like he sat beside her in the filth. She read by fading twilight light the words her husband wrote months, perhaps years earlier. "My beloved Isabel, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to hold you," and my worst fear came true. Fernando showed his true face. I always knew my brother had darkness in his heart. I saw how he eyed the estate, not as land to love, but numbers on a bank statement. In recent months, I discovered he was diverting crop money. I was gathering proof, but my heart has been weak, and I fear I won't have time to confront him. Isabel, you're sweet and good. I knew in my absence Fernando would try to crush you. He sees you as weak because you have heart. But he doesn't know your heart is your greatest strength. He likely threw you out of the big house, likely gave you the ruins. I bet my soul he sent you to the old stone house on the hill to mock us. The irony, my love. The stone house was always my true home. And now it will be your fortress. In this box is money I diverted before Fernando could steal it. It's yours. But most important is the notebook. It holds records of all Fernando's illegal accounts, frauds, thefts. With this letter, you'll find my true will. I made it secretly with a notary in the neighboring town, far from the family lawyer's bought eyes. In it, I leave everything: the El Roble estate, bank accounts, investments, and this house, exclusively to you and our son Matteo. Fernando thinks he won because he has the mansion key, but you hold the key to truth. Don't fear, my lioness. Dry your tears, lift your head, and reclaim what's ours. I'll love you beyond the stars and back. Antonio. Isabel finished the letter, and absolute silence fell over the cabin. Even the outside wind seemed to stop listening. She touched her husband's signature with fingertips, caressing dried ink. A transformation was happening inside her. The scared widow, the woman who begged mercy under hail, was dying there in the ashes. In her place, something far more dangerous was born. Cold, hard certainty, like steel, settled in her spine. Antonio had called her lioness, and a lioness doesn't cry in corners when hyenas circle her cub. A lioness hunts. She grabbed the folded document behind the letter, the will with official seals, stamps, witness signatures. It was a legal nuclear weapon. Fernando had evicted her based on lies and being natural executor. But this paper voided everything. Fernando owned nothing. He was a thief living in a house lent by the charity of the one he tried to destroy. "What does the letter say, Mommy?" asked Matteo, seeing her expression change, eyes drying, shining with new, fierce light. Isabel looked at her son. Dirty face, damp clothes, disguised hunger. Then around at bare stone walls. Fernando wanted this to be their tomb. Well, it would be a tomb, but not hers. "The letter says," Isabel spoke slowly, carefully tucking the paper back in the box and clicking the lock shut satisfactorily. "Dad left us a map to take back everything the bad man stole." Isabel stood. Despite the dirt, she rose with queenly elegance. She felt energy not from uneaten food, but pure justice. "Matteo, help Mom hide this back in the wall, but just for a little while. We'll hide the treasure." "Yes, because tomorrow, we'll use it to clean this house, transform it into the prettiest palace you've ever seen. And we'll wait." "Wait for what?" Isabel smiled. Not the sweet mom smile, but an enigmatic one loaded with revenge promise. "We'll wait for the wolf to come blow our house." Night fell completely over the hill, but inside that windowless cabin, fear was gone. With rustic tools, Isabel lit fire in the cleaned fireplace. Dry wood Don Ramon brought caught quickly. Flames licked stone, illuminating the ruin with orange, warm light. Heat radiated, drying clothes, warming bodies. But the fiercest fire burned inside Isabel. She watched flames and saw the future. Fernando dragged off their lands, his shocked face, justice served cold. She clutched one hidden gold coin in her pocket. Tomorrow she'd go to town, but not to the lawyer yet. No, Fernando was clever. If she attacked now, he could flee, hide money, bribe judges. Antonio said be a lioness, and lionesses wait for prey to misstep. She'd use the money to strengthen her position, do exactly what Fernando mocked, reform the ruin. Make that house shine so brightly, Fernando's envy would draw him like a moth to flame. "Rest in peace, my love," she thought, watching dancing flames. "Leave the rest to me. I'll finish what you started." Night on the mountain was silent, but Isabel slept the sleep of the just, hugging Matteo and the metal box hidden under a loose floor slab for now. She dreamed of tractors, high walls, and Fernando's face when he learned the foolish widow had beaten him. The weeks after discovering the metal box were a miraculous transformation, not just for the hill's stone structure, but Isabel's soul. With a strategist's prudence, Isabel didn't rush to spend all the gold. She was smart. Days after the storm, she went to the neighboring town, far from San Lorenzo's gossip, and sold just one gleaming centenario at a reputable pawn shop. The money was more than Fernando had ever given her monthly. With bills burning in her pocket, Isabel bought no fancy clothes or jewels. She bought solidity. She discreetly hired crews of Don Ramon's friends, simple men with strong hands and closed mouths who respected the old mason and remembered Antonio's kindness. "No luxuries," she told them with steel determination. "Security. Make these walls impenetrable. My son will never be cold again." The ruin ceased being a ruin. The patched zinc roof was replaced with strong oak beams and red clay tiles gleaming in sun. Empty window holes were closed with treated wood frames and double glass insulating against mountain cold. The non-existent front door became a solid wood gate with iron locks. Inside, the house became a sanctuary. Isabel bought thick wool rugs for the cold stone floor. Don Ramon repaired the old wood stove and built rustic but beautiful furniture. The fireplace, that secret keeper, now burned nightly, filling the air with sweet pine and home scent. It was no longer the poor widow's cabin, the stone house, a proud rustic fortress on the hill, defying the valley mansion. Matteo changed too. Cheeks regained rosy color. He ran nearby meadows with their adopted dog, knowing hot soup and a singing mom awaited. No more corner tears. Isabel regained her smile, but her eyes stayed vigilant. She knew peace was borrowed. The beast would wake. And it did. Down at El Roble, things weren't going well for Fernando. His supposed financial magic proved incompetence. Without Antonio's expert hand guiding foremen and treating workers with respect, production fell. Employees, resentful of his cruelty to the widow, worked grudgingly or quit. Fernando's gambling debts, once contained by Antonio, grew like weeds. On Tuesday morning, Fernando stepped onto the mansion terrace with coffee and binoculars, a habit to oversee his domain. He scanned fields for lazy workers to fire, but his gaze stopped on the North Hill. Fernando dropped his coffee. The porcelain cup shattered on the floor, staining his Italian boots, but he didn't notice. "What the hell?" he whispered, voice trembling with rage and disbelief. Where a defeated widow should live in plastic and misery, or better, an empty lot because they'd left, rose smoke. A perfect white column rose straight to blue sky. Not only that, morning sun reflected off new glass, a flawless red roof, a growing garden with fresh painted white fence. It wasn't a shack. It looked like a luxury retreat. Fernando's twisted mind raced. How? She had no money, found a lover, stole before leaving. Then greed replaced curiosity. Fernando was a failed businessman, but sniffed others' money. That North Hill plot had the best valley views. He'd given it because it was useless rocks. But now restored, cleaned, with a stylish, habitable house, the land was worth a fortune, could sell to a foreign investor for a boutique hotel or luxury cabin, solve his debts in one stroke. "That woman improved my property," he said aloud, smiling maliciously. "And with no money to justify the work, it's surely illegal. Perfect." Fernando ran to his office and called a shady contact, a contractor who owed favors and asked few questions. "Prepare the tractors, Ramirez, and bring 3 of your biggest guys. Express eviction. Today, I reclaim what's mine." Up on the hill, morning passed deceptively peaceful. Isabel baked fresh bread in the wood oven, yeast aroma filling the kitchen. Don Ramon sat at the table with Mateo, teaching sailor knots with rope. Suddenly, the dog by the door raised its head and growled, low, deep warning. Isabel froze with the bread tray. "Is that?" asked Don Ramon, frowning under bushy white brows. Distant but approaching, the unmistakable roar of heavy diesel engines, metal tracks crushing gravel, a 4x4 truck racing up the slope. Isabel's heart flipped. She knew who. "It's him," she said. She set the bread calmly, but hands trembled briefly before clenching into firm fists. Mateo looked fearful. "Uncle Fernando." Isabel knelt and took her son's face. "Listen, Mateo. Stay inside with Don Ramon. Whatever happens, don't come out until I say. Understood?" "But Mom, I'm scared." "Don't be. This is our house. No one enters a lion's house without permission." Don Ramon stood, his kind face gone, now a man who'd worked the land lifelong and tolerated no abusers. He grabbed a heavy iron shovel by the door. "I'm going out with you, Doña Isabel. Won't leave you alone against hyenas." Isabel nodded. She went briefly to her room, not for a weapon, to the new hidden safe in the closet, pulling out the envelope with Antonio's will and leather diary. She pressed documents to her chest like a sacred shield, felt truth's power pulsing. She took a deep breath, smoothed her simple but clean dress, and walked to the door. Outside, the scene was intimidating. 2 massive yellow tractors with mechanical shovels parked at the white fence edge, engines running, belching black smoke like beasts snorting before charge. Several burly men in work vests with unfriendly faces leaned on machines. And in front, stepping from his luxury truck, Fernando. Impeccable as always, but face red with rage and excitement. He eyed the reformed house with hate and desire. Seeing Isabel emerge alone and seemingly fragile on the porch, he let out a dry laugh. "Well, well," shouted Fernando, walking to the fence gate. The little widow had hidden resources. How nice my cabin looks, Isabel. Isabel descended porch steps slowly. No running, no shouting. She stood firm in the entrance path, blocking the house. Don Ramon positioned beside her, resting the shovel like a royal scepter. "This isn't your cabin, Fernando," said Isabel. Her voice didn't tremble, clear, loud, echoing in the silent valley. "You gave it to us out of charity. Remember." Fernando reached the fence, kicked it open, breaking the new latch, and entered the garden, trampling flowers Isabel and Mateo planted days ago. "Ah, dear sister-in-law, things change. I see you've invested money here, money I suspect you stole from my brother's accounts before he died. Doesn't matter." He stopped 2 meters away, invading her space with usual arrogance. "I've come to inform you, our verbal agreement is revoked. I've decided to develop the North Hill. You have," he checked his fake gold watch, "10 minutes to get the kid and your rags out. This structure will be demolished for the hotel." Isabel felt fire in her stomach. She looked at the house, her refuge, where Mateo laughed again. "We just fixed it. It's our home." "It was a precarious loan," lied Fernando, pointing at tractors. "And it's over. Those men have orders to tear down these walls. If you and the old man are inside, well, regrettable accident." Don Ramon stepped forward, raising the shovel slightly. "You won't touch one stone of this house while I breathe, Don Fernando. Have some shame. It's your nephew's home." Fernando eyed the old man with disgust. "Get out of the way, useless old man, or I'll have you buried with the rubble. You're no longer my employee. You're trespassing trash." Fernando signaled the drivers. Engines roared louder. Mechanical shovels rose, ready to strike. The noise was deafening. Inside, Isabel heard Mateo scream for her. It was truth time, when fear becomes action. Fernando smiled, expecting Isabel to beg, cry, kneel like Storm Night. He awaited submission, but what he saw made his smile falter. Isabel didn't retreat. She advanced, 1 step toward Fernando, closing distance until she saw sweat on his brow. Her eyes blazed terrifyingly. "Tell them to stop," she said, lowering to a dangerous whisper. "What?" mocked Fernando, though unconsciously stepping back. "You'll hit me with your lady hands. Tear it all down," he shouted. "Start with the roof." 1 tractor advanced, tracks biting garden soil. Steel shovel neared the new roof eave dangerously. Crack. Wood crunched slightly from the light hit, echoing like a gunshot. "Stop!" shouted Isabel. Not panic. She raised her right hand, showing the document packet against her chest, the black leather diary and official sealed will. "And if you touch this house, Fernando, you'll destroy evidence that will send you to prison for the rest of your miserable life." Fernando signaled sharply. The tractor stopped. Sudden silence, broken only by idling engines. He narrowed eyes at the old notebook in Isabel's hand. Something familiar. A distant memory of his brother writing. "What nonsense is that?" asked Fernando, trying composure but feeling cold sweat down his back. "You recognize this," said Isabel, raising the diary. "Antonio's handwriting. And this," she shook the will, "his true last will. Antonio knew you'd steal from me, knew you were a thief, and wrote it all. Every cent you diverted from the estate, every fake offshore account, every supplier fraud, dates, amounts, account numbers, all here, Fernando." Fernando's face paled, from rage red to ash gray in a second. "Give it," he growled, lunging to snatch the papers. But Don Ramon was faster, thrust shovel handle into Fernando's chest, stopping him with a thud. "Stay right there," said the old man. "Don't even think of touching her. Fernando panted, staring at papers like a venomous snake. That's forgery. My brother wouldn't write that. You did. No one will believe you. I'm Fernando Montenegro, owner of all this. You're nobody. Isabel smiled. Now she controlled. Oh yes, maybe they won't believe me. She looked beyond tractors to the forest path, a rising dust cloud. A white vehicle with blue-red lights sped up, followed by an official black court car. But I think the district judge, who just arrived thanks to Don Ramon's discreet call, will be very interested in what your dead brother has to say about you. Fernando's gaze followed. Police lights. The trap closed. The vulture descended to eat, but prey became hunter. Sirens died, official car doors slammed, like the sweetest music to Don Ramon's ears, funeral bells to Fernando's. The hill, moments ago a battlefield of roaring tractors and tyrant arrogance, fell tense, heavy silence, barely broken by Fernando's ragged breathing. The police chief, a robust, serious mustached man, knowing the Montenegro family decades, stepped from the vehicle with the local judge carrying a folder. Police surrounded the perimeter. Tractor drivers, sensing wind change, shut engines and raised hands, quickly distancing from their boss's orders. What does this mean? Fernando tried shouting, voice now high and panicked. He adjusted his jacket, trying to recompose power, but cold sweat betrayed fear. Commander, good you came. This woman invaded my property and— Shut up, Fernando, said the commander without looking, walking straight to Isabel. The disrespect was the first clear sign Fernando's reign of terror ended. The commander removed his hat before Isabel. Señora Isabel, sorry for the delay. Don Ramon came to town at dawn, alerting us this man might try violence. When he told us about the will you found, we came immediately. Fernando's eyes bulged, turning to the old mason. You old traitor. Don Ramon smiled calmly, satisfied, leaning on his shovel. Traitor? No, Don Fernando. I'm loyal, to those who deserve it. You never did, not even the ground you walk. Isabel handed documents to the judge. Her heart pounded, not fear, but long overdue release. Mr. Judge, she said firmly, this is my husband Antonio Montenegro's diary, and his true will, drafted and authenticated in another district's notary 3 months before his death. Please read it now. The judge adjusted glasses and opened the document. Absolute silence. Even birds seemed stopped to hear the sentence. Fernando tried stepping forward. A policeman's hand on his gun stopped him. I, Antonio Montenegro, the judge read solemnly, in full mental possession, revoke any prior will, due to irrefutable proof of fund diversion and bad faith by my brother Fernando. I declare him unworthy of succession. Murmurs among tractor men. Fernando paled like paper. That's a lie, he shouted desperately. Fake. She wrote it, the judge continued, ignoring screams. I leave the entirety of El Roble estate, bank accounts, investments, and the property known as the Stone House, to my wife Isabel Montenegro and son Mateo. To my brother Fernando, I leave Christian forgiveness, and not 1 cent of the patrimony he tried to destroy. Isabel felt hot tears on her cheeks. Christian forgiveness. Even after everything, Antonio tried nobility. She wasn't sure she could forgive, but justice was being done. The judge closed the folder, eyeing Fernando with contempt. Fernando Montenegro, this document is authentic. Signature matches, notary seal legitimate. But that's not all. The judge signaled the commander. The diary contains dates and offshore account numbers. We preliminarily verified this morning. You diverted millions from your father's inheritance and estate profits while your brother was ill. That's misappropriation and qualified fraud. Fernando tried running, stupid, cornered animal instinct. He turned to his truck, but didn't take 2 steps. The commander grabbed his arm, twisting it behind. "You're under arrest, Fernando." The handcuffs click on Fernando's wrists was louder than any storm thunder. Isabel watched. No joy on her face. Revenge, she discovered, isn't sweet. It's just, and justice is serious. Seeing her son's uncle, handcuffed in mud, suit dirty, dignity shattered, was sad, but necessary. "Isabel, please," begged Fernando, as they pushed him into the patrol car. Arrogance gone, replaced by pathetic pleading. "I'm family. Don't let them take me. Antonio wouldn't want this." Isabel approached the car, looked at her husband's brother through glass. "Antonio wanted to protect family, Fernando. That's exactly what I'm doing. You were the danger." The patrol drove away, raising dust, taking the shadow weighing on their lives. Tractor men, ashamed, apologized to Isabel and left quickly, promising free fence repair. Only 3 remained on the hill: Isabel, Mateo, Don Ramon. Mateo ran and hugged his mom's legs. "The bad man is gone forever, Mommy." "Yes, my love, forever." Isabel looked at her house, the stone house. With the will, she now owned the Valley Mansion, grand, with rooms, pool, luxury, staff. She could descend now and resume queen life. But she looked at walls she and Ramon restored, the fireplace that saved her, the garden Mateo planted. That house had love. The mansion below had only lonely echoes. "What will you do, boss?" asked Don Ramon, wiping a discreet tear. "Go down to the big house? Want me to prepare the move?" Isabel smiled, from the soul. "No, Ramon. The big house. We'll turn into a school for workers' children, or a clinic. Antonio would like that." She turned to the rustic, solid cabin. "This is my home. Here I discovered who I am. Here my son learned strength. Here I found the treasure that changed everything. Not the gold, but certainty that love builds roofs where evil sees only ruins." 6 months later, the legend of the Hill Widow spread across the region. El Roble estate never prospered more. Isabel, with Don Ramon's help, whom she named General Foreman with a dignified salary allowing his own home reform, managed lands with wisdom and compassion. Fernando was sentenced to 15 years. Without family money for fancy lawyers, he ended alone in his cell, with only greed memories as company. One cold winter night, the stone house scene was postcard-worthy. Historic fireplace roared, now clean and majestic. Thick rug full of toys. Isabel sat in an armchair reading, while Mateo, healthier and happier than ever, played with his adoptive grandpa, Don Ramon. "Grandpa Ramon, tell again how you and Mom beat the tractors," begged Mateo. Isabel lowered the book, looking at her life's 2 men, the wise old and sweet child. Antonio's gold remained in the bank, securing Mateo's university future. But what shone inside was worth more. Isabel learned life can take our roof, send ice and hail storms, send evil people to steal joy. But when we have courage to dig in dirt, clean past ashes, we find indestructible strength. She looked at Antonio's photo above the fireplace. He seemed to wink. "Thank you," she whispered to flames. "We won, my love." Fernando's greed wanted the world, but evil left him nothing. Isabel, given only ruins, used love and perseverance to turn stones into a palace. Often life puts us in roofless houses. We feel exposed, cold, abandoned. But remember Isabel's story. Greatest treasures aren't in comfortable mansions where everything's easy, but hidden under difficulty's ashes. It's in trials we discover our strength. God never gives a cross heavier than we can carry. Sometimes He allows storms just to force us to build stronger shelters. If you made it here and your heart beat faster with this mother's victory, I humbly ask, leave a like on this video. Simple for you, but help spread hope to thousands needing it today. Comment victory below if you believe good always triumphs over evil in the end. I'll heart every comment. Subscribe to Hidden Tears Tales and hit the bell. New soul-touching stories weekly. Most importantly, share this with someone in hard times. Tell them, hold firm. Your treasure awaits. Thank you for listening. God bless your home, family, and roof. Until the next story.